Hey everyone, I'm joined here with Justin Bergeron, manager at ARC Global Logistics, who has very kindly agreed to step into the void here and have a chat all about tariffs. I got a few questions in from folks, but in general, I'm hoping just to spend a few minutes talking to Justin to try and get a handle on what exactly are tariffs and how are they presumed to be working, and at least from a games perspective, what are the kinds of things that people might want to think about, knowing full well that they could change tomorrow? A lot of what we say could be out of date very quickly. So especially the numbers, but just understanding the background of what tariffs are and how are they usually dealt with might give you a foundation to nail yourself to that isn't
Sure.
as sandy as other things. So Justin, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to chat with me.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So, starting off, tariffs. Tariffs are taxes. And how would you define tariffs as opposed to other types of like customs or other types of taxes that people might see or be exposed to?
Sure. With customs charges, there's essentially three main charges. You see duties, taxes, and tariffs. A lot of people use those interchangeably, which is kind of fine, but they really are different. Taxes you usually will see as a constant. When we think of the EU and the VAT, we know VAT entry, and that's usually around 20%. In the States, we have import taxes that are quite small, the merchandise processing fee, the harbor maintenance fee tax, and so on. Australia has their GST, Canada GST, HST. So those are a constant. Duty is actually kind of a constant too, maybe more long term, and is usually fixated on specifically to commodities. And tariffs are very similar to that too, because it's based on the commodity as well. However, the country of origin matters too. And that's all usually based on the manufacturing value too. That should be noted. It's never really the retail value unless you have a sale in transit or something like that.
Okay, cool. So when if you're in Europe, you're used to this a lot. In the US, you're probably not as used to seeing this. Maybe you're used to seeing this in Canada. When you buy something, let's say you're buying a board game, but you're buying it from the States, or you're buying it from Germany, or you're buying it from somewhere other than your country of origin, you might get slapped with a customs notice that says that you have to call up the post office and pay some sort of duty or tax or customs charge for this thing. So if you're in the UK, for example, and like me, and I'm ordering something from Germany and it's 50 bucks, I might get, if I hadn't already paid that, I might get a slip through saying I have to pay my VAT before, or I have to pay my import duty or taxes before the goods are given to me. That is not a tariff. That's not what we're talking about here. That's like a tax or an import tax. Is that fair?
Yeah, that kind of sounds like a scam, actually. I think I would delete something like that if I saw that come through. But
It happens a lot. It happens a lot. It happens a lot.
yeah, with the
And they catch you off guard because these numbers are not usually small. So you're not factoring them in. And it's a similar kind of thing when people are running Kickstarters. They have to be very, very careful to make it very clear for the Europeans that you're going to have to pay that as well for this. And
yeah,
then hopefully they work with a fulfillment partner that is taking that into account and DDPing and all that kind of stuff. But that is not like, you're not going to get a notice in your door as a backer or as someone who bought a board game. You're not going to get a notice about these new Trump tariffs, for example. Like that's not exposed to at the customer level. Is that right?
that's absolutely correct. The importer of record, whoever is bringing it into the local commerce and clearing customs, is the one that needs to deal with that. Now, they might have to pass that along to you and might communicate that, or they might eat it. I mean, right now, the tariffs are so absurd that I don't know how people would eat those tariffs, but that's for the individual to figure out. But yeah, the tariffs are usually designed. I mean, your audience is probably savvy enough and knows they're designed to create leverage and try to curb behaviors by a certain country or certain industry, whether it's anti-dumping type stuff, if China is making steel prices really low. I mean, that's been going on for a long time. We kind of saw this coming. Trump did this in 2018. That was the first round of tariffs. And actually, board games was on the docket. They were like the last list, which never really came to be. So we dodged a bullet back then. And unfortunately, here we are now. So
Yeah, so at least started off as being quite a universal tariff that was affecting everybody evenly. Now they're starting to look like they're cracks in terms of the types of items and levels of technical sophistication or whatever. So consumers, it maybe is even more complicated from a consumer perspective.
You're
I
talking
mean,
about the
consumers
car
themselves.
industries and cell
Yeah,
phones and such. Yeah.
exactly. So, the technology industry carve out. So you might see more of these like carve outs, and there's one bit of a carve out, or at least a classification question that I have in a second. But
Okay. Yeah.
thinking about the flow, you said earlier it's about where the manufacturing is taking place. What constitutes a Chinese product?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be made in China. And it really comes down into percentages. You could get, say, paper product and wood products. Actually, a lot of folks probably see this now because in the States we have what's known as the Lacey Act, and it's the EPA is asking where did this come from? It's designed to protect endangered plants, which is a good, noble cause the way they're going about it. I don't necessarily agree because it's kind of a pain, but it's a nice example because you'll see listed on there from the factory, the Chinese factory might get paper products from Poland or whatever it might be. So, but obviously that is a different product. And that's what it comes down to. It's like, well, what is the end result? So if you want to lead into the question of like, well, what if I have, 40% of my product made in China and then that's sent to Malaysia, Taiwan or whatever, Vietnam, and then it's manipulated even more. So you get into this really big gray area with customs as to how much it needs to be altered. And I don't know the nitty gritty details about it, but I have a feeling that there might be based on commodity to commodity, and there's certainly a large percentage change that's needed. So over 50%. If I had to put a number on it, I would say 60% or more that the product has to be altered in order to be able to consider now it's from this country, it's not from this country.
And when you say altered, is that value putting into is altered defined as value being put into the product in terms of cost or some other nebulous way of, for example, we use long pack for
Yeah.
our manufacturer. They got their wood from Romania, or let's just say they got their wood from Romania.
Mm-hmm.
So the cost of that wood, but that's a commodity, and they've taken that wood and they've carved it and they've drilled it and stuff, so they're making it into a new thing. Understood.
Yeah.
Let's just say though that long pack for whatever reason couldn't make anything out of cardboard, and so they then made the wood and made the tray and the cards, and then they sent it off to Vietnam so that they could make the cardboard. And it ended up being that the cardboard cost 60% in your terms
Mm-hmm.
of the game, and then it was sent to the UK where they actually packaged it. For some unknown reason, we decided to get it packaged in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Something that goes from China to Vietnam to the UK. Like if the vast majority of it was, or if like say 60%, as you say, or the majority of it was made in Vietnam, or from a dollar amount, let's just say it cost us $4, $5 to make the thing. $5 is easier. If $3 of that $5 we paid to someone in Vietnam, does that then classify it as a Vietnamese product?
Yeah,
Is that how?
it's a great question, Galb, and I honestly don't really know, but yes, in theory, I would say that because the majority, it does come down to the price there, that it's certainly in the discussion to look into, but I would
Or an
say yes
argument?
in that. But that's where, I would defer to my brokerage team. People that are importing and doing such movements should probably consult a lawyer that's proficient in importing, whatever the country it's going into. But yeah, in that scenario that you paint, I think that's would be suitable that the southeastern country could be the country of origin. Again, it has to be altered enough. This is based on the value, but we're also talking about like, okay, it came from China as A and now it's B. It has to be
Yeah,
very
you,
obvious.
you can't
You
you
can't
can't
just put it in a
just
box and
or
then
or,
like,
or,
oh,
or yeah, or
yeah,
slap on a $5 sticker on it and say, well,
right.
$5 is more than $4, so therefore it's now that's a Canadian sticker.
And
Okay,
that's not to
and
say that it doesn't happen. I'm sure it happens all the time. I mean, even back in 2018, part of the reason why Trump went so hard at the Chinese this time around, too, supposedly was because of, well, and actually Vietnam, too. Remember Vietnam? They first were like
yeah,
87% tariffs.
yeah.
One of the things I read in there was just like Trump was basically saying that, well, you guys enabled the Chinese back when we put the tariffs on them and we're floating product through there. So,
So one of the different elements in terms of the percentage of production as a uh as a use case, I think there's a difference between these tariffs are factored on your manufactured goods rather than retail price. However, what constitutes, so if it comes from a different country, and maybe this is the case. Maybe you're not. Maybe this isn't your area. So forgive me. Let's just use this as an example. You've made the product in China. You are not fulfilling from the U.S. You're going to do your end shipments to the U.S., but your fulfillment center is going to be in Canada. And so you have your $3. Let's just say for interest sake, it's $3 to produce. You ship it to Canada. You're then going to sell it into the U.S. at $30. Are you likely when you do that, especially using someone like you all, for example, you're concerned with getting the product into Canada, but
Yes.
then the one of the logistics, one of the like 3PLs in Canada are going to take it to the post office, or not take it to the post office, but they're going
Sure.
to
Courier
slap
service.
on a label and send it to Justin in New York, right? And so when they do that at the border, are they then saying where was the actual thing manufactured? So therefore we need all that information, or are they going to say it's a $30 item coming from Canada? Canada's tariffs right now are 25%. We're going to charge 25% on $30 rather than 145% on $3. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but
I know.
the first thing that I'd like to distinguish is so I work for a freight forwarding company. ARC Global Logistics is a freight forwarder. So what we concentrate on is moving bulk cargo from
Yeah.
one region to another. And then, as you say, it gets to a warehouse, a fulfillment center or distribution center, and then it goes all out to all the end users. So in your example, again, we would move it from China to Canada, and there's no tariffs right now. To make that move, you would pay like the 5% taxes that Canadian imports would normally and have been charging. And then when you go to move it, whether it's the post office, DHL, FedEx,
Yeah.
again, now this is going to be on them. But in my opinion, in the way that I see it play out, is that you would pay. So now you're selling it to me for $30.
Yeah.
It didn't originate from Canada. It was not made in Canada. It was made in China. And so I would have to pay the Chinese tariff, which is now 145 on the $30.
Oh, on
Now,
$30
yeah, because that's what you're
that's the
selling me.
most recent number that you're seeing. That's the value because you've
Because
now increased the value because there's a value exchange there. Okay, I
okay,
see.
so let's walk it back. Like when we go to cross the border and you're creating a sale between Canada, you in Canada and me in the US, you need to give a value to the game, right?
Yeah, sure.
And you're not going to put the manufacturing value. You don't want me to know that. I mean, maybe you do, maybe you don't.
Yeah.
But so whatever is declared, that is what it's going to be taxed, tariff, and put duties
So
on.
these tariffs, the two parts to this is percentages and country of origin in terms of manufacture, not country of origin,
Yeah, it's the country of origin that will matter. So
but of the
yeah,
manufacture of it rather than we got into Canada. So now for all
okay,
intents and purposes, a Canadian product,
yeah,
here you go. But it's the retailer. That's not how it works.
no. In my opinion. So if we did the same move, say we moved it to Canada and then we did a freight move
Yeah.
to the US, because this would be something more that like we would do. We would ask you to create a commercial invoice and packing list. And we would say, well, where did it come from, Gil? And you'd be like, well, it came from Long Pack in China. And then we would say, and actually when our brokers go to actually do the entry, there oftentimes is a field that will pop up and they will ask for the manufacturer's address just to confirm like where it came from. Now, again, back to your example is we're talking about courier service with like these onesies, twosies. And up until now, that really didn't matter because there was the de minimis rule where if it's under a certain value, I think it's $800, you don't have to pay duties, taxes, and tariffs. That's now changed, especially if it's from China. Trump has enacted that you do have to pay the tariffs. In fact, and everything that I've known, if something is tariffed, you should always have to pay that. You might have to pay the duties and taxes, but the tariff is always in play. Now, again, if anyone is doing that and whoever they are using for the courier service, they should ask them and talk to them about that because you want to know what you're getting into. But I could tell you again, if you were doing a freight move, you wanted to move 3 or 4 pallets, we would have to. But then obviously, like, well, if you were selling me the pallets, then we are using that sell price. But if you're, that's what I meant to segue to before. If you're moving it to a US fulfillment center and now you're just doing your own inventory move, you can use the manufacturing cost because you're not selling it to
Which
anyone
makes
yet.
sense.
Yeah.
As if it had to come in via a Canadian port or something like that. Like it had to be
Yes.
transferred onto a different ship. Like it feels closer to that in that you're
Yeah, that's a good example of it. That happens all the time, actually. Like stuff that goes into Chicago will go by way of boat to Vancouver or Prince Rupert and then goes by rail to Chicago or
Right.
other places.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so basically it sounds like I think that there's this majority number. You're not quite sure of the amount, but that I don't know, is information that people should be able to find out just in terms of like the percentage of value or manufactured amount from a particular country. That's important in terms of like, is it a Chinese product? Is it a Vietnamese product? Is it something else? That's one thing. The other thing is understanding the differences between the tariffs, which are specifically looking at country of origin, and then what value that item is when they are hitting the tariffs. In your view, if we're using this example, $3 product goes to Canada, gets sold over the border for $30, you very well might have to be paying, because you are declaring that the country of origin is China, that you are paying 145% today. It might be completely different tomorrow. You're
Sure.
paying 145% on the $30 because that is the value that they're seeing, rather than 145% on the $3 or 25%, which is the current tariff for Canada, on the $30. So if that's the case, you have to be very careful with that and understanding like setting yourself up and doing an inventory swap over to
Yeah.
make sure that you're optimizing for that as
That's
well.
how I see it as
Okay.
where we're at right now, Gil.
That's where we're
I
at. Okay,
mean,
cool.
people could probably move stuff from Canada to the US using FedEx for, I don't know, 2 dozen times and not happen, but just be aware that maybe that could happen. I don't know how closely it's watched at this point.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
does FedEx really have the time, or do they even want to like look at every single invoice and be like, you know what? I don't know if this one was from China or this, let's challenge that this didn't come from Canada.
Yeah,
So,
interesting, interesting.
yeah.
So then thinking about what is a board game, as a question, what is a book? I think a lot of people have been talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
this as a
Yeah.
thing. And so there are these tariff codes and they exist. And there's this thing called an essential character clause in terms of what is the thing that you're looking for. I know that there's some differences between like kits and sets versus board games. Some people might think, well, I'm getting a board game, you have to put together all the pieces.
Mm.
Like you can't just play the game, so maybe it's a kit. Like
Yeah.
why are people talking about this stuff? And what are they getting at when they're asking questions around essential character?
Yeah. So the big thing, like you mentioned, there's an exemption on books right now. And we've run into this. We've maybe about half a dozen customers with role-playing books. We've talked about this. I actually had another customer that had graphic novels, which
Yeah.
did fall under the exemption after it was reviewed by my brokerage team, and they actually consulted Customs Border Patrol on it too. The way that the exemption reads, and again, broke this is all of this is moving so fast, right?
Yeah.
We're on unstable ground. We're all just scrambling to try and make sense of it all. So you could find a broker that would say, oh yeah, RPG books, they're under the exemption clause. The way that we were told and read into that exemption clause for the books was that it needs to be informational, a reading book. And unfortunately, RPG books are considered a game. They're a game. They're not read just to be read. They're meant to be played.
Yeah.
And so that the distinction there is what has caused us to believe that the RPG books are not exempt. Now,
Interesting.
the graphic novels, comic books is meant for reading. So my brokerage team determined, and again, based on discussions, sending emails to customs agent, was like, yeah, okay, that falls under, it's an informational reading book. So,
Now, are there
and I
ways
can
like
see how you could argue it both ways too,
you
by
could
the way.
argue
Yeah.
exactly. And what happens when there's a blend? So, for example, a lot of RPGs, like campaign books, they will have an aspect of it that is the game, but a lot of it is a reference book
Mm-hmm.
for the person that is organizing the game. It has
Yeah.
lists of classes. It has different things. It's not actually it's the instruction book of how to play. Just in the same way that if you bought a book about how to play basketball, it would be a reference book about the rules of basketball. And obviously, not necessarily knowing if you have an answer on this, but like, does it, is there either an opportunity or is there an opening that folks who are designing RPGs should be looking at or should be consulting with folks on, in terms of like differentiating between this is a reference book versus this is a game, or this is a reference. 90% of this is a reference book. We also have a little game that you can play as well, as like within it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that kind of stuff matter?
I think it does, Galp. I mean, I see things like that where, with the board game accessories, some of the board game accessories, if you look at it on its own, let's say, And I know you wouldn't fold up a play mat and like have it in the board game, or like a poster, let's say, it might be a little more
Yep.
realistic, but a
Yep.
poster has a different code than board game accessory. But if you had the poster folded up in the game box, all of a sudden it's like, well, that's okay because it's part of the game accessory. It's with the game. So that does matter. And back to your point of like, if you did have a book that was for informational purposes to explain how the game is played and it's not the actual game, then in my mind, I would think like, yeah, that should fall under the exemption. Now, the real way to figure that out is you write to customs for a ruling, or you get a lawyer involved. Again, I can pass that along to my brokerage team. We're happy to provide guidance, but
Yeah.
it's not the end all be all. We're just basically looking at the codes and how the regulations are written and saying, based on what you've presented, because oftentimes too, we'll be like, can you send me a picture of it? Can you tell me the description? What is it made out of? And this spills over to other things too, like clothing. All the codes for clothing are very detailed out, whether it's like for kids, what is it made out as far as the material, like 60/40 cotton or whatever. So it can get pretty technical. And, but yeah, we can provide guidance, but there's going to be situations again where we basically have to come to you and just say, we're not comfortable in doing what you're saying. Or the opposite, like, yeah, actually, based on what you've said, we feel pretty good about this. And hopefully I can have this discussion with the customer beforehand, before we, especially right now, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
we're pumping the brakes on everything and making sure we're all on the same page. And so, yeah, it's very tricky.
So just in terms of like thinking about the tariffs right now, it's a very fast moving situation and it's impacting everything from like, costs, like shipping costs right now seem to be weirdly low.
Yeah.
I wonder why that's the
Yeah,
case.
right.
But so when you're thinking about, I think a lot of people out there who are currently designing games, or maybe they're just getting ready for the Kickstarters or whatever, is it worth trying to figure out how the numbers work today? And this is, I know this is reading the tea leaves a lot, but
Mhm.
like are there things that you can suggest that people start to think about strategically, that would be good either way, whichever way their tariffs go, even if they're not necessarily like in production right now?
Yeah, unfortunately, Gail, there's not a lot of options
No.
as of right now. But what I am telling people, if they can, is to just hang tough, buy some time right now. Because again, like what we've talked about, it's so unstable right now. It's literally things have changed like every other day. Trump might tweet something or put something on Truth Social today, and all of a sudden our conversation could change entirely.
Yep.
It's just we need we need to settle down and kind of see a baseline for a little while and then let the markets react and then go from there. So I've been telling people like just wait until, like, people were asking back before the deadlines, and I was like, let's at least see what happens once April 9th rolls around.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even still though, I would say like if you can wait till at least May, I'm not saying a deal is going to be struck, but maybe we have a better understanding of where those numbers are.
When so
So my
when you
first
say
suggestion
wait,
is like store it in China. Negotiate with your factory to just try and keep it in China for as,
right?
cost effective manner as you can.
Okay, cool. So the suggestion is try and store it elsewhere as cheap as you possibly can, and at least wait to see, is 45, 145, is that the new normal? Is that going to be the peak? Is it going to go higher? Some people have
Hmm.
talked about free ports and the
Hmm.
idea of shipping to a free port that's in the US to take advantage of the low shipping prices right now,
Yeah.
but not actually allowing them entry, or like pay to have them stored in some of these free ports. What do you think about that as a strategy? Does that work, or like is that like a great idea, but it's not that, not as attractive as you might think?
Well, to be upfront with you, so what we're talking about there is like a bonded warehouse.
Yeah.
So you're moving the freight from origin to the US or wherever it's going, and then it's on US soil, but it's not in US commerce. It has not cleared customs. And so those free trade zones, those bonded warehouses, well, I mean bonded warehouses, again, it
Yep.
just hasn't cleared customs.
Yep.
They're expensive. And they're expensive because you're talking about a specialized service. West Customs has agents that watch over the whole facility. A secure, the security has to be pretty tight. I do read some stories about things being stolen in there, but with all that said, my biggest knock on using that method, the bonded warehouse, is again, it's pricey. And we're in this indefinite spiral of trade war where we don't know how long it's going to be. So you could literally have, if I move my stuff now and let's say it gets to the East Coast in 6 weeks and maybe things settle down there, but it could be another month or 2 months before the tariff drops to a level where I'm like, okay, now I'm comfortable and I can move it over here.
Do you advise like taking advantage of the cheaper rates right now and sending it to a third country that is closer so that like the shipping isn't, ship it to Canada, hold it in Canada, and then do an inventory swap when the tariffs go down and you don't then have to wait six
Yeah,
weeks with everybody else trying to get on board these
sure.
ships.
Yeah,
Is that worthwhile or not?
I think that's actually a really good idea. And a customer of mine brought that up, and I'm sure, and I've seen it, I get emails and it's fun to watch the online brainstorming that happens
It's all
amongst the,
moving.
yeah, and I think that's actually one testament to the board game industry that we're going to get through this because you guys are awesome at sharing info, just really smart people strategizing. Anyway, I had a customer that was like, well, what if we just sent it to Canada and it just sat there? It is provided that you get storage at a reasonable cost. I mean, that actually is a really good idea because then once the tariff drops to a level that you're comfortable,
You're right there.
you're like
Yeah.
2 days away from getting in there versus waiting 2 months if it's sitting in
Yeah.
China.
Yeah.
So yeah, your storage costs, and I think Canada is a good middle ground compared to say bonded warehouses in China because
Yeah.
Canada's storage is probably going to be more expensive than China, but way less than a bonded warehouse. And
In a
again, like
free
if you
port type thing. Yeah.
yeah. And if you had to pull the trigger and go, you know what, my inventories are really low or my backers are really pushing for this particular product, you
Small
could bite the
amounts.
bullet and yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think
I've
that's a
actually
really
reached out to a lot of, like Zing and Pick and Pack and Board Game Bliss, but also non-board game partners at warehouses to
yeah,
be like, hey, do you guys have space? Are you getting asked about this? So that's in the works right now. I've got some feelers out there. Yeah.
that's really, really interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Are any other final kind of thoughts in terms of like either suggestions aside from hang tight? Are there things that you've seen when you've been looking at like these kind of brainstorms, other kind of tips that you're seeing people think about, and even if it's just today, it works today. Are there kind of tactics or approaches that you've seen that you think actually might be worth a look, assuming that tariffs stay similar to how they are, which is a huge assumption, which probably not going to be the case. But if this were to become the new normal, are there kind of some tips that you could or that you suggest people follow?
Yeah, just one final thought too. What you were when we were talking
Oh
about
yeah,
Canada is you mentioned too. If you send to Canada, you can capitalize on the low freight rates now. And what I wanted to mention that I didn't get to is if and when this opens up, it'll be a floodgate, right? And right now, the ocean carriers are pulling back a lot of their voyages. There's a lot of blank sailings. They're pulling service basically, and so that's going to make it even worse for once it opens up because they're going to have to get these boats back into circulation again. But to you, from a shipping point of view, like I don't know. I mean, obviously, we would love to see places like Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe or something like that develop more manufacturing for the board game community. I mean, obviously, it'd be great to have it here too. I just don't see how that's going to happen anytime soon. And I think even if it does, it's going to be quite automated. Like Germany, Ludofact has a nice factory facility, but it's very automated. And I think that that's kind of what we would have here. I think that if the community continues to support itself, try to get active. I mean, I saw a great write-up by Price Johnson of Cephalofair on his site. He wrote a blog and then he was on CNN last night or this morning. And you know what? He did a really good job of breaking it all down. But also his point, which I think is awesome, is push your congressmen, push the politicians that the toy industry needs this. I mean, again, like 90% of US board games and toys and such come from China. And there's no way that it's going to change overnight. So, and like, the other thing that I feel bad too is my own offices in China, the folks at the factories in China, they're really nice people and
yeah.
they're actively looking for answers too. But unfortunately, I feel like we're all stymied at the moment. There's not a whole lot
Just
they can
waiting.
do. And other than keep the chatter going, keep the pressure on. I mean, again, like you kind of said earlier, it already seems like there's some chinks in the armor with Trump if he's pulling back on the iPhones and the automobile industry. Yeah, because it's all going to hit hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm going to keep my ears open too if there's anything that we can do on the shipping side. But unfortunately, there's nothing like legal that I can see that you're like, oh, yeah, no tariffs. We got exempt from this.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't think that. I think it's more about like trying to figure out like the best ways to work within whatever framework there is to give yourself the most amount of flexibility or potential upside. Like we're definitely like I'm talking with folks, manufacturers in Europe. I did before though,
Hmm.
and there were reasons why like we went with long pack,
Sure.
but most of it was a quality problem. You know, that like
Mhm.
that's the biggest thing that I think a lot of folks don't quite understand who are arguing with this. Like, you know, the machines that they have there are just better. Like
Yeah, oh yeah.
they're tighter in terms of their margins and like millimeter margins and all this kind of stuff. So like
They've got it down to
the
a
whole
science.
argument
Yeah.
of trying to get an industry going in the US, yeah, great, but you need consistency. You need to say this 145% tariff is going to be there for the next 10 years for someone to take the punt and want to get one of these $3 million machines, pay a
Yeah.
bunch of tariffs on it, and then bring it over
Right.
because the Chinese are making the best machines. And so like
Yeah.
it's a very complex thing. Understanding in terms of like, well, you do get the US is trying to use a very blunt instrument, bringing a bazooka to a knife fight sounds like it, but like there are reasons to totally understand that there are reasons, but yeah,
Right.
yeah, just trying to get get to grips with like the nuts and bolts of like how it works and how it doesn't work is super yeah, complicated, and someone like you, it's super helpful to talk to. So
Oh
so
man.
thank you very much. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been my pleasure. It's been a learning process for me too, and I just keep telling myself that we're gonna get through this. We got through COVID. COVID was horrible in the shipping industry. I'm talking about. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
horrible in general, but for the
Yeah, yeah.
shipping industry, it was wild too. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm hopeful that this is just a bump in the road that we
Yeah,
can
yeah,
get
yeah.
to
And
an
I
agreement
think
soon.
Dusty Draws said, if it's not this, it's something else. Like, there's
Yeah,
gonna be something.
right.
And so being a
That's
bit
true.
okay with like trying to get past the frustration and just be like, all right, so how does it work? How can we work around this? And is always probably a better mentality to adopt.
One other thing I would add too that again it's probably a little controversial but I feel like publishers have to add these costs in and pass them along. And even as much as that stink, like I know that you want to do the right thing and everything, but I think the end users have to feel the sting too, as much as that sucks. But then change might really happen too, you know?
Yeah, but at least from our perspective, I feel like there are problems on both sides. Like
Yeah.
one
See, I don't
side,
know
it's like
enough.
making things more expensive for customers, but also everything's becoming more expensive for customers. So they are less likely to be able to have the disposable income
They won't buy
there
it.
to
Okay, yeah, yeah.
spend on our stuff. So they're getting squeezed on both ends, and it's tough.
Good point.
You could totally imagine that it's going to get tougher. But you're right. You're right. Like until people feel the squeeze and you can see if the government is willing to put up with that,
Hmm.
which I don't know. It just doesn't seem like they are. Like,
Yeah,
you won't really see a lot of change, until that happens.
yeah.
Cool.
Well,
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really
absolutely.
appreciate it,
I
Justin.
was gonna say
And
we could do this again in a month or
I'd
3 weeks.
love it. And we're gonna have a completely new set of lingo, and we're gonna know all the different everything's gonna have changed. But
Yeah.
anyone who is listening to this, Justin's details are in the description of this. So if you do want to get in touch, Justin's very graciously says he's happy to chat with him or other members of his team at Art Global. So really appreciate it, Justin. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for that, Gil. Yeah, this has been great. Take
Cool.
care, guys.
Thanks.